Now, whenever I pose the question of what do you guys want to see more of in the future when it comes to topics and coverage, more microbrand coverage is always at the top of the list of just recommendations among you guys. So what I'm gonna be doing today is looking at a collection of around 10 to 15 different microbrands with a blog down below with over 30 to 40 more, looking at some of the best microbrands or brands that you should at least know from the micro type of perspective. Now, in terms of this video, just some ground rules before we begin and how this is going to work. We're going to be looking at some different microbrands here. We're going to be looking at primarily one watch per brand just to try to keep this as concise as possible. This is a video that could get really long quickly if I don't put these type of parameters around it. Also, understanding what a microbrand is versus an independent. Now, this is certainly a gray area, and some people might argue, and there's probably gonna be some watches mentioned here that could maybe fall under either category in some instances. But how I define a microbrand is a brand with limited production, typically specializing in a watch type that doesn't have extensive resources for production, as well as in-house calibers or having a master watchmaker at the helm. I know this is kind of a contested idea, gray area in watches, but essentially what I'm saying is I don't want to include something like an FP Journe in this list because I see that more as an independent brand rather than a micro. Oh yeah, and one final point, just whenever talking about microbrands, I think a lot of people just assume that everybody that makes a video about a microbrand is just getting paid. None of the content that we make on this channel, we get paid to make. This is all just being funded through our website, teddybaldassarre.com, so just keep that in mind. All of the watches that are mentioned here are mentioned because I just thought they were cool. I'm not getting anything for free. I'm just wanted to make you guys aware of them. And I think the idea of micros is a pretty cool concept as you get farther along. Despite the brand equity not being there, I think they're for a particular type of individual. I think you have to keep in mind what you're getting into when you get into micros because they don't have the same type of popularity associated with them. So if you try to sell it, there are gonna be some challenges. Keep that in mind, but I also wanna just be really honest upfront about just the perspective of this video and what we're going for. So now for our first brand and watch on this list, we have Brew with the Brew metric. So this is a model that at the time of at least shooting this video is fairly recent in terms of its unveiling. Now Brew Watches I've been a fan of for quite some time. When I first released a microbrand video, just kind of like a overview video like this, I think it was honestly in like 2018, several years ago, one of the brands that stood out to me was Brew, mostly because they're just interesting take on design. Now the mastermind behind this brand is Jonathan Ferro. He's a great designer. I really respect what he does. And in the early stages of starting the channel, he was very open in conversation about how he designs his pieces. I actually have a video in the past where I sat down with him and kind of talked about what is his thought process behind designing a timepiece. And it's really interesting to get inside of his mind. And as you can see as an end result of what is being displayed here with this metric, you could tell it's a little bit more unconventional compared to the norm. The bracelet of this piece, the design of this piece, everything is kind of just odd, unique, quirky, yet surprisingly clean and consistent to the DNA Brew has created. And there's also small little nods to what this brand has been since the beginning. If you look at the outside of the minute track, you can see between the 25 and the 35 second indication on that track, it has a different color. Now that is basically just referencing the optimal time for brewing an espresso shot, which is a little bit too hipster for probably most people, but is a cool touch with the barista undertones of the creation of these watches. Many of these cases were made with the intention of kind of resembling a lot of classic Italian espresso machines. And I think they do a fantastic job with emulating that in a really fun and eccentric way. Colors are playful. You're getting a Seiko Mecha Quartz movement, the VK68 inside, so you're getting a lot of the mechanical sweeping second function with the reliability and accuracy of quartz. So a nice middle ground here in terms of what is being delivered. But for under $400, I think Brew is a great one to look at. I've been a strong proponent of this brand for quite some time, and I think this is a great new showing and representation of what the brand does well. So next up, we have the Manta Noble. This is the kind of traditional everyday style watch from the brand, more kind of that entry-level option. But if you're not familiar with Manta, they're probably one of the best finished micros in this price range and independents in this price range. I'd put them up against pretty much any of the main big players in the industry in the range in which they represent. Now, this watch here is going to be an everyday timepiece, 38mm case, getting a Solita movement on the inside that is highly regulated and ticking with great precision, 150 meters of water resistance. But really the star of the show is going to be the finishing, both in the hands, the faceted plied hour markers on the dial. The dial finishing itself is also beautiful. Nice mixing of brush surfaces with the polish elements, with the beveling, tapering down to one of the best clasps that I have found in the entire industry in this price range. Now, Manta has gained a ton of traction just given the finishing of their pieces as well as, I would say, probably the leadership behind the brand and what they've done in the past. So same owners as Everest bands. So there's a lot of just industry contacts that they've developed and allowing them to output a product that they can be proud of. Anybody that's owned these watches will, I'm sure, say how impressive they are in terms from a finishing perspective. So definitely a huge fan of what they do. So next up we have Orion, the brand Orion with their Hellcat, an everyday option that is versatile as well as having some old school vintage elements in terms of its design. Now this brand first got on my radar with the release of their dive watch called the Calamity. Not crazy about the name, but the look of that piece really stood out to me. Now the Hellcat is a more attainable option as well as a one that's gonna be probably more suited for casual wear from an everyday perspective. Now Orion makes no nonsense watches that have some fun 70s touches of style throughout their designs. This particular piece comes in a variety of different dial colors. This one that we're featuring here is this nice baby powdered blue color that I think really pops with the syringe style hands. You have that blasted case with polished areas between the links and along the edge of the case. Now very similar to the Calamity, I can see some connections to Omega as well from a design perspective with the bracelet. See a bit of Globemaster with the design here, and honestly, it's pretty well executed for the most part. It's a very nice bracelet. The clasp is very solid as well. This is just a sharp looking watch. Automatic Miyota 9000 series inside, so that's a 28,800 vibration per hour movement, so you're not getting the standard 8,000 series, so nice up performance and really can almost compete with some of those entry level ETA calibers with this Miyota. Pretty solid watch, and this one I think just looks really attractive in this blue format. Now next up here we have Vero with the Ridge Trail. So this is a brand that I first became aware of from their rally watches, and they've since just completely changed their entire collection and really positioned around this new model that is kind of more diver oriented in terms of its execution, but very everyday in its format. When I first saw this watch, it had a distinct profile to it in regards to the layout of the bezel as well as the dial, and mostly just because of how broad that bezel was. We are talking a 40mm case, but when you factor in that bezel is 5mm thick on either side of that dial, it does make it appear a bit smaller. Getting some nice AR coating on this as well. The version that I have here is this mint green dial that is striking with that blackened bezel along the outside. Getting back to the bezel as well, it reminds me of the SDR versions of the U50 or the U1 that have that kind of striking tegimented look. Similar here, but coming in at a fraction of that price at $875, getting an automatic Sellita SW200 on the inside, going to be fully regulated and assembled in the United States in Oregon. There are some legibility concerns when it comes to that second hand. They went with a green second hand on a green dial, which might be difficult for some eyes out there. I have no problem with it, but I know eyes only get worse as the years go on. So that's just something to be looking out for. They have different variations, but pretty striking watch, suitable in terms of the movement, water resistance, and wearability. This is a cool piece, and honestly makes you question sometimes what are brands doing from a mass market perspective. So next up, we have a fan favorite for many out there in a brand that's one of the quickest mentioned in the world of micros, and that is Ferro with the Barina. Now, when most people consider microbrands, they're typically associating three-hand watches as well as dive watches. That's the format that most of them follow. But when it comes to this watch, we're looking at a chronograph, something that most micros do not go down the path of, as well as doing it in a pretty unique execution when it comes to the color profile, something that is commonly associated with this brand. Now, Ferro is a British watch company using Swiss movements, known for their use of well-crafted timepieces with playful colors, rich with character. Now, they've become one of the faster growing micros in the world of watches. This particular version comes in with a 41mm case, but a pretty compact lug to lug with that broad lug profile, and coming in at 44mm, 100 meters of water resistance, which is nice, and you're getting an automatic Sellita SW510 for the movement inside of here. Price is a little bit steeper though, but I love the red hands, the leaf style hands, as well as the color of blue. This is a unique looking chronograph and so different compared to what many mainstay brands are putting out from this perspective. Moving into our next piece, we have Formax with the Formax Reef. Now, Formax is a brand that kind of came on the stage with the release of their Essence, an everyday style watch with some remarkable finishing for the price. That watch in many ways was the window into what the brand would become, and I think that next chapter was ushered in with the release of the Formax Reef. The brand's now flagship dive watch, utilizing many elements that people loved when it came to the Essence and putting it into a dive watch package. Now, this one comes in with a slightly larger case size at 42 millimeters, but a very compact lug-to-lug distance of 48 millimeters. Now, in terms of the actual just broadness of the case, it kind of reminds me of the Nautilus in terms of what it is going for with that actual case shape. So certainly can see some elements there, but truly the star of the show and why so many people like this watch is Formax is so good at just packing in so many specs and just high quality finishing for the money. This watch is probably one of the best finished dive watches that I have come across in this price range, if not the best. The bracelet, like pretty much every Formax watch, given their industry contacts and the family behind this brand, actually doing a lot of OEM work for some high horology brands and a lot of luxury brands in the world of Swiss watchmaking, is a reason why this is actually being able to take place here within this watch. Now, the reef comes with an automatic SW 300 caliber. It's a cost certified movement as well, so getting some nice peace of mind there. 300 meters of water resistant, ceramic bezel along the outside with nice tactile feel. And finally, you can go ahead and adjust the different dial colors, bezels to your liking and what you want to go for. Now, the Formax is certainly going to be on the pricier end of things, so let's look at another dive watch that is going to be a little bit more attainable and one that I really enjoy, Traska, with their free diver. Now, the free diver has went through several different just modifications, variations, and there was just unveiled a new variation that we're gonna be looking at here today in the watch that's going to be mentioned. They also released a new dual crown variation that I think looks incredibly sharp as well, but the free diver is their flagship model that I think got this brand on more people's radars. For this watch, you're getting a nice wearable case, 40.5 by 48 millimeters with that lug-to-lug, nice suitable water resistance of 200 meters, solid lume, variety of different dial colors to choose from. Also getting an automatic Miyota 9000 series on the inside. But probably my favorite thing about this brand is going to be their case treatment. So these cases are going to have a hardness rating of 1200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale, basically meaning that they're going to resist scratches incredibly well. Now, looking at something like a Damasco, for example, which kind of markets that same technology, this is being done in this watch in terms of the actual hardness and resistance to scratches at a fraction of the price. Not to say that it's necessarily on the same tier as that, but in considering that it's gonna be half the price, what they're doing here is pretty nice, no question about it. In my video looking at the review of their Summit Tier model from a few years back, looked at kind of a untreated link versus a treated link and showing how one resisted scratches versus the other. And I think that was a good demonstration of why this is such a cool selling point for these watches and why I'm a big fan of Traska. For our next brand here, we have Baltic with their latest iteration of the Aquascath with the dual crown. So Baltic as a brand is one of the most beloved when it comes to micros out there. It has quickly ascended. I mean, I believe that they started their company around the same time I started this channel, and they have grown so much since the days when I first became aware of this brand, and for good reason. They just knock it out of the park every single time with their designs. They simply, honestly don't miss. This watch is pretty much more of the same, coming in with a very attractive price tag of $650, wearable dimensions of 39 by 47 millimeters with some nice thickness as well. Seeing again a 9000 series Miyota caliber on the inside with 200 meters of water resistance. This French brand, again, probably one of the cornerstones when I think of Microbrands, under $1,000, and have even when going over $1,000 have stuck the landing as well. Very few brands can have this level of range and breadth to what they do, and Baltic is probably one of the best out there and a true thing if you're trying to maybe get into the world of micros for the first time, not have to spend a lump sum of cash, and get into a brand that also I think does a great job in delivering some good value. Next up, we have Annodan with the Model 1 with their Fume dial in plum. So this is a model we actually have done a full in-depth review on, and I always, when covering microbrands, typically don't want to do a full in-depth video on that one watch because when you're talking about micros, again, it's not a mass market product and there's not that many people that probably are that interested. But this was one that I thought warranted it because Annodan, from my perspective, is delivering some of the best high quality enamel in the price category. And enameling as a process and an art form is a difficult one to master. I definitely would recommend checking out that full in-depth review about this watch just to get a better idea. Now, Annodan was founded in 2015 in Scotland and still have all their production there, an in-house watchmaker as well to go ahead and regulate and fine-tune these watches when they're coming out, and they're highly regulated. Jumping back to that point at the beginning, independent versus micro, This type of artisanal practice is something that is seldom seen in the world of watches in this price category, and I think they do a fantastic job. This plum, when you get it at the right angle, the AR coating on this isn't perfect and great. I think they could certainly improve that, because anything that gets in the way of obstructing this dial is a tragedy, honestly. But when you get it at the right angle and you can just get a glimpse of this watch, we can show some macro footage of it. So striking, beautiful timepiece, and a huge fan of what Annodan does. For our next brand here, a brand that was mentioned in last year's video, but we have a new model from them with the Fortitude from Astron Banks. Last year we looked at the Sea Ranger, and I have to be honest, the first time I saw pictures of that watch, I thought it was cool. It had like these ghosted, just kind of bezel design that I just liked the look of. But when we got those in person finally, I was like, wow, this is a well-finished piece and pretty impressive. Why do not more people talk about this brand the same way they do like a Baltic, for example? Because I think for the most part, everything that's being packaged in this watch is very much on the same level playing field as those. And this Fortitude is now pretty much undercutting what the Sea Ranger did and doing it from a traditional everyday perspective. 38.5mm case, 46mm lug to lug distance, still getting 200 meters of water resistance on this watch, which is fantastic. Movement inside is a familiar 9000 series caliber from Miyota. Now I know I've been mentioning these Miyota 9000 series movements quite a bit throughout this video, but they're very solid movements. I would recommend checking out my breakdown of third-party calibers in the world of watchmaking. I can link to that down below. Probably will allow you to have maybe some better understanding of where these sit. Essentially the entry-level options when it comes to 4 Hertz movements from a mechanical perspective. Very nice wearability on these. And Astron Banks is a Chicago-based microbrand and quickly have carved out a niche for creating some very attractive looking mechanical tool watches. And this is a brand, again, that I just think more people need to be aware of. So many people are quick about mentioning Baltic in this price category, but everything that I'm seeing here is just as good, if not better in many instances. And I think Astron Banks is just an overlooked micro brand that doesn't get mentioned as much as some other ones out there. Now for a familiar brand on the world of micros, we have Zelos with the Mako version 3. And we're talking about just straight value on this list. It's probably going to go to this one, but honestly, this watch is simply not fair when you look at the specs. What Zelos has done, the Singapore-based brand, in their time in developing the standard for what I think an enthusiast wants, if you have that spec, kind of list and sheet that you're trying to check off, they deliver every single time, and I think it make it difficult to look at some of these mainstream brands the same way because of what they're able to pack. Now, Zelos from an overhead perspective, I know is just not gonna be what many of these larger brands are. Elshan, the founder of this brand, has a lean operation going for him, and that allows you to have a lot of benefit for what you're getting at the end of the day. I can't even imagine what their margins are on these things just because of what they're able to output. But this watch, just kind of hear me out here. 40mm in terms of the case size, pretty decent thickness at 14mm, not crazy for a dive watch, but everything else from there is fantastic. Lug to lug 46mm, water resistance of 300 meters, again a Miyota 9000 series movement on the inside, sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel, slide adjusting clasp for micro adjustment, no tools needed, a titanium case and bracelet hardened to 1200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale. And just to remind you, the tegimented cases from Zinn are 1200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale. So for $450, simply put, this watch kinda isn't fair. But now for the last watch on this list, this is a brand that I was contemplating whether or not to put in this video, maybe just put in the blog, but given the visual demonstration that's almost needed to showcase these watches, I thought you had to put them in this video because these are by far going to be the strangest watches on this list, not by a byproduct of the dial design as it's rather traditional, but instead a patented case system that allows easy interchanging between different case capsules that can give you essentially a completely new watch without the need of tools. Now this brand is based in France, where they create and assemble their watches using top grade Swiss movements. But when I first saw this and tried this, I'm like, oh boy, this seems a little gimmicky. And this, candidly, I think there is some gimmicks to this. But it is pretty cool and slick to be able to exchange a watch and kind of give it some different looks. In terms of the design, they are a bit safe, but I think that's kind of what you need to do when you're talking about interchanging the watch with different components and case structures. That's probably what you need to go for to have that level of versatility. But there's these different capsules, different case formats that you can create. You can buy them in a bulk and bunch. Now there's no question this is a bit strange, and practically speaking, I'm sure many would just opt to go for a couple of watches rather than changing the case. However, this is a fairly novel concept with a true proprietary case system that is easy to operate. I was just amazed how quickly I could go between changing the complete look of the strap watch. They did a very nice job. This feels like a product that was created by like the Swatch Group with how like just simple it is and how much probably research and development I would assume it went behind this piece. In terms of the price, this is gonna make these a bit of a harder thing to swallow, but in regards to doing something different in the field of micros, this is certainly going to fit that mold, and it was something that stood out to me as different in a world of watchmaking, again, that I always mention is all about following the norm and not going against the grain. But all right, guys, that is my list of some micro brands to look out in 2021 and some new products from those brands in 2021. But again, if you do want more watches that weren't able to be featured in this video, check out the blog down below for 30 to 40 additional micros that couldn't be featured in this video. Imagine how long that one would be if I included every single one. Also, guys, if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that as well. It does help out the channel in addition to that. Also, if you want to stay up to date with the content, be sure to follow along on Instagram as well. See some good photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.